It's time for Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock.
Believe me when I say we have a difficult time ahead of us. But if we are to be prepared for it, we must first shed our fear of it. I stand here without fear because I remember that I am here not because of the path that lies before me, but because of the path that lies behind me. I remember that for 100 years we have fought these machines. And after a century of war, I remember that which matters most. We are still here! Tonight, let us make them remember we are not afraid!
Welcome back to Declare Your Independence with me, Ernest Hancock, here in Phoenix, Arizona, from the beautiful studios of Freedoms with an S, freedomsphoenix.com. As we start the election process again for 2012, which is of interest to many because today Dr. Paul has announced he's officially running for president. Now, his son was elected U.S. Senate from Kentucky. Now, Kentucky has had some issues of late, and we were following this during the 2010 election cycle going, man, there's some problems going on down there. Now, what happened is we just found out from bradblog.com last week. Brad Friedman's on with us, and he telling us there was a bunch of people, there's like 150-something years of incarceration time doled out to hopefully more than one person. Brad, I got you there?
You do, Ernie. How are you, sir?
I'm more than wonderful. And you?
I'm doing okay.
Tell me everything. Now, we have a federal trial. I know you were covering this. We were linking a lot of your work on Freedom's Phoenix. People had an idea what was going on there. Walk us through what happened, because I think people need to know the backstory, and Wisconsin gets involved in it's all over the country. I mean, you and I have talked about this for years. I'm going, look, man, still voting? So you're trying to advocate for, let's go ahead and vote, and let's get it accurate if we can. Following it, tell us what happened in Kentucky.
Well, actually, I'm not advocating voting or not voting. All I ever advocate is that if you want to vote, if you're a legal voter, you should be allowed to vote, and you should be able to have your vote counted accurately, and the people ought to be able to oversee it to know that it was, in fact, counted accurately so that we can have or at least have a shot at true self-governance in this country. So that said, this Kentucky story is remarkable, and it does tie into what's going on in Wisconsin right now because it reminds us of the importance of not trusting your election officials, but rather having, checks and balances over your election officials. And the story of what happened in Kentucky, I think, lays out the reasons for that about as clear as you will ever find. You've got a case down in Kentucky where there was a massive roundup of election officials in, 2009. In March of 2009, they arrested the county clerk of Clay County, Kentucky, a circuit court judge, the school superintendent, several polling place judges, rounded them all up. They were all part of the election commission out there in Clay County, arrested them, and charged them with vote buying, vote selling, and the manipulation of electronic voting machines in election after election after election down there in Clay County, Kentucky. The charges only go back as far as 2002, but it was the election cycles 2002, 2004, 2006 that were brought to court. However, during the course of the case, the federal prosecutors down there said that this had been going on for decades down in Clay County, Kentucky, and the circuit court judge, Judge Miracle was his name, he had personally been involved with it for decades down there, as were some of the other election officials who completely gamed the system from top to bottom essentially, selling space on the ballots, selling votes to these candidates, manipulating the electronic voting machines themselves after voters had thought they cast their vote for a particular candidate. In the end, this crew of criminals and cretins and democracy haters was finally sentenced in, where are we here, last March of this year to more than 150 years, all told, in federal prison. So for once, we've got an upside to one of these stories. There actually is some accountability brought in this matter, at least down there in Clay County, Kentucky.
Okay, what was it that they found, though? I mean, these guys, they're being bad. They're bad. Mm-hmm. What were they doing bad?
Well, what they were doing was they were pooling funds first from the candidates. They were pulling funds from the candidates themselves to get onto a slate of candidates that this cabal was going to support come hell or high water and make sure that they won. And they were doing this largely in Republican primaries. This is Clay County is an extremely Republican and, ironically, extremely poor county, one of the poorest and most Republican counties in Kentucky. And what they were doing was they were getting their selected candidates. Candidates were able to sort of buy their way onto this slate, and they were able to ensure that the candidates would win in the Republican primary, which pretty much meant they were then going to go ahead and win the general election because the Democratic Party out there was so weak. A lot of times these candidates ran completely unopposed in the general election. So they were getting money from the candidates, and then they were doing a number of things to make sure that they got elected. They were buying votes from people, paying them $20 if you vote for this particular candidate, and they would do it through absentee ballots, which is the easiest way, frankly, to buy and sell votes.
Verify that they actually show us your thing. We seal it. We put it in. Here's your money.
Yeah, and then as of 2006, they upped their game a little bit by using the electronic touchscreen voting machines that they had just gotten into the county in 2006. Specifically the ES&S iVotronic touchscreen voting machine, which, by the way, is used all over the country. It's one of the most popular touchscreen voting machines out there, and it has been at the heart of a whole bunch of election failures that we can get into. But what they were doing in 2006 was they took one of the election judges was actually a Republican, and she was told by the circuit court judge, I believe she was given lenience in a case that she was involved in, a court case she was involved in, if she would change her registration from Republican to Democratic so that she could then be assigned to serve with another Republican judge in the polling place. And when folks came in to vote on these machines that they weren't yet familiar with, what they would do, it was a pretty low-tech hack here. It was more social engineering hack than anything else. What they do is they would tell the voters, okay, go through, make your selections, and when you're done, hit the vote button. And there's a great big red button at the top of the machine, right above the touchscreen, that says vote, that lights up, and you touch that button. And they told them, once you hit that vote button, your vote is done and has been cast. And voters would go ahead and do that. They'd hit that big red vote button. They'd think their vote was cast. They would walk out, and they would be done. And then one of these two poll judges would go to the machine and actually complete the voting process, which isn't complete when you hit the vote button, much as you might think it would be. Instead, after you hit the vote button, the screen pops up and asks you to review your ballot, and then eventually you have to confirm. You have to hit the confirm button in order to cast your vote. But because these things weren't actually cast after they hit that red vote button, this allowed the poll judges to go back in and change the votes to their slate of candidates of the folks who had bought their way onto that ballot.
When we come back, we're going to find out how this all came out, and then who did the most time, and what the solution is for the next election. Brad Friedman from BradBlog.com. We'll be right back.